You think you know Easter Island? Giant stone heads staring at the ocean. Ancient mystery. Maybe some aliens thrown in by your conspiracy theorist uncle at Thanksgiving. Wrong. Well, mostly wrong. Because what archaeologists just discovered underneath those famous heads changes everything we thought we knew. And honestly, it's way weirder than aliens. The statues have bodies, full bodies, buried underground. For centuries, we've been staring at what are basically stone icebergs, seeing only the tip while the rest stayed hidden beneath our feet. But that's just the beginning. Keep watching, because what they found down there rewrites the entire story of one of humanity's most isolated civilizations. Let's start with what you probably think you know. Easter Island, or Rapa Nui as the locals call it, sits in the middle of absolutely nowhere. We're talking 2,200 miles off the coast of Chile. That's roughly the distance from New York to Denver. Except instead of drive-through burger joints and gas stations, there's just ocean. Lots and lots of ocean. It's one of the most remote inhabited places on Earth. The kind of place where your Wi-Fi router would file for emotional damages. The island is tiny. Only 63 square miles. You could jog around the whole thing in a really ambitious afternoon. About 8,000 people live there today, but back in the day, the population peaked somewhere around 15,000. Not exactly a metropolis, but impressive when you consider they were living on a rock in the middle of the Pacific with 0 Amazon deliveries. Now, those statues. The Moai. There are roughly 900 of them scattered across the island, and they're not small. The average Moai stands about 13 feet tall and weighs around 14 tons. That's roughly the weight of 8 cars, the biggest one ever erected. A beast called Paro, standing 33 feet tall and weighing 82 tons. And the Rapa Nui people carved these things without metal tools. Let that sink in for a second. For decades, archaeologists assumed the Moai were just heads. Made sense, right? That's what you see when you visit the island. These massive stone noggins jutting out of the ground, staring inland with those distinctive blank expressions. Tourists take selfies with them. They're on postcards. They've become a meme, the ultimate ancient side-eye. But here's where things get interesting. In 2012, archaeologists from the Easter Island Statue Project started doing something radical. They started digging. And what they found was like discovering your goldfish is actually a shark. Those heads, they're attached to full torsos, complete with arms, hands, and intricate carvings that had been hidden underground for centuries. The excavation photos went viral. There is something deeply unsettling about seeing these familiar stone heads suddenly sprouting entire bodies from the earth. It's like finding out the Mona Lisa is actually a full-length portrait, and we've just been framing it wrong this whole time. The internet lost its mind. Conspiracy theorists had a field day. But the real story is actually more fascinating than any alien theory could ever be. So why were they buried? Time, mostly. Not some elaborate ancient cover-up. Centuries of erosion, landslides, and natural sediment buildup gradually swallowed the lower portions of the statues. The island is volcanic, formed by 3 extinct volcanoes, and the soil is constantly shifting. Rain, wind, and the occasional earthquake kept depositing material around the bases of the Moai. Nature's version of a slow-motion burial. But here's the kicker. The bodies weren't just decorative additions. They contained information. The archaeologists found petroglyphs carved into the torsos. Ancient writing. Symbols. Messages that had been hidden from view for hundreds of years. It's like discovering your great-grandfather's diary in the attic, except the attic is underground and the diary is carved into a 14-ton stone statue. The carvings depict canoes, fish, and strange crescent shapes that researchers believe might represent the moon or traditional Polynesian navigational symbols. Some show geometric pattern that don't match anything else found on the island. It's a whole hidden language, a buried conversation between the ancient Rapa Nui people and whatever gods they believed were listening. And that's not all they found. Tools. Lots of tools. Stone picks, basalt hand axes, and chisels scattered around the buried portions of the statues. The Rapa Nui carved the moai out of volcanic tuff from a quarry called Rano Raraku. It's basically a volcanic crater that became an ancient statue factory. And when archaeologists excavated around the buried moai, they found the workshops where the carving happened, perfectly preserved by centuries of sediment. Here's where it gets even wilder. The moai weren't always standing upright. The excavations revealed that many of them were intentionally toppled during a period of social collapse on the island. Around the 17th and 18th centuries, Rapa Nui society went through what archaeologists politely call a tumultuous period. Resources ran out, clans started fighting, and in the chaos, rival groups started pushing over each other's moai. Imagine being so mad at your neighbors that you knock over their 14-ton religious statue. That's commitment to a grudge. Why did society collapse? The short answer is, they cut down all their trees. The longer answer is, way more complicated and way more tragic. When the Polynesian settlers first arrived on Rapa Nui, sometime between 700 and 1200 AD, the island was covered in palm forests. Not tropical paradise palms, but massive trees that could grow up to 50 feet tall. The island was lush, green, and probably pretty nice. But those trees were useful. Really useful. You needed them to build boats for fishing. You needed them for firewood. You needed them to move those massive stone statues from the quarry to their final positions across the island. The dominant theory for years was that the Rapa Nui used palm logs as rollers, laying them down like a primitive railroad track and rolling the moai across the island. Recent research suggests something different and frankly more ingenious. Archaeologists now think the Rapa Nui walked the statues. Seriously. They attached ropes to the head and base of each moai and used teams of people pulling in coordinated movements to rock the statue forward step by step. It's like those moments when you have to move a refrigerator and you waddle it corner by corner across the kitchen floor. Except the refrigerator weighs 14 tons, and falling over isn't an option. Either way, they needed trees. Lots of them. And they cut them faster than they could regrow. By the 1600s, the island was completely deforested. No trees meant no boats, which meant no fishing in deep water, which meant less food. No trees also meant soil erosion, which meant worse crop yields, which meant even less food. The population crashed. Society fractured. Clans fought over dwindling resources. And those moai that once represented ancestor worship and spiritual power became targets in clan warfare. But back to those excavations. The buried portions of the moai revealed something else that completely changes our understanding of the island's history. Red pigment. The statues were painted, or at least some of them were. Chemical analysis of the stone surfaces showed traces of red ochre, a natural iron oxide pigment, used by cultures worldwide for thousands of years. This wasn't a light dusting. The moai were apparently covered in vibrant red paint, along with white coral eyes and black obsidian pupils. Imagine seeing hundreds of these massive red figures staring across the landscape with gleaming white eyes. Less ancient mystery, more ancient intimidation. The Rapa Nui weren't trying to be subtle. They were making a statement. And those eyes? Researchers found fragments of white coral, carved into perfect ovals, and polished obsidian discs at excavation sites around the island. For years, archaeologists knew the moai had eye sockets, but they assumed the eyes were a later addition or possibly never completed. Turns out they were there all along. We just hadn't found them because they'd fallen out or been removed when the statues toppled. In 2010, researchers actually restored one moai with replica eyes, and the transformation is startling. What was once a stoic blank face suddenly looks alive, alert, watching. The Rapa Nui believed their ancestors' spirits lived in the moai, and with those eyes staring at you, it's not hard to see why. They weren't just religious symbols, they were guardians, protectors, always watching over the villages they faced. Oh yeah, that's another thing. The moai almost all face inland, not toward the ocean like most people assume. They are watching over the villages, the ceremonial platforms called ahu where they were erected. Only 7 moai face the ocean, and those are positioned at a place called Ahu Akivi, which archaeologists believe had special astronomical or navigational significance. The ahu themselves are engineering marvels. These aren't simple stone platforms. They're precisely constructed structures, with multi-ton foundation stones fitted together so perfectly you can't slide a credit card between them. Sound familiar? The technique is eerily similar to Incan stonework, which has led to all sorts of theories about contact between Rapa Nui and South America. Recent genetic evidence actually supports some level of contact, though probably limited and definitely not involving aliens. The excavations also revealed something about the chronology of statue construction. The buried moai show different carving techniques and styles, suggesting the tradition evolved over centuries. The earliest statues are simpler, less detailed. As time went on, the carvers got more ambitious, more artistic. The later moai have more pronounced features, more intricate back carvings, more personality. It's like watching an art form mature in real time, except the timeline spans centuries and the canvas weighs several tons. And here's something most people don't know. They never finished. The quarry at Rano Raraku contains nearly 400 moai in various states of completion. Some are barely outlined in the rock. Others are fully carved but still attached to the quarry wall. A few were in the process of being moved when something made everyone stop and walk away. The archaeological evidence suggests the statue carving tradition ended abruptly, probably during that period of social collapse. Walking through that quarry must be surreal. Imagine a massive outdoor sculpture studio frozen in time. Here's a head, there's a torso, over there is a complete moai lying on its side waiting for a moving crew that never came. It's a snapshot of a civilization at work, interrupted by forces they couldn't control. Recent excavations at the quarry have revealed even more. Workshops with specific tool distributions suggesting different teams specialized in different aspects of the carving process. Food remains indicating the carvers were fed well, probably by their communities in exchange for their work. And post holes suggesting temporary structures, maybe shade covers or storage buildings, once stood around the work areas. The most shocking recent discovery? The moai might have been connected to fresh water sources. Geophysical surveys conducted over the last few years detected underground water channels near many of the statue platforms. The ahu weren't just placed randomly. They were positioned over or near sources of fresh water, making them not just religious sites, but practical gathering places where people could access this crucial resource. On an island where fresh water is scarce, this makes the moai even more significant. They weren't just spiritual guardians. They were markers, signs pointing to the resources communities needed to survive. Archaeologists are now excavating around these water channels, and what they're finding is rewriting the textbooks about Rapa Nui society and how they manage their limited resources. There's also growing evidence that the Rapa Nui practiced sustainable agriculture for far longer than previously thought. The narrative of ecological collapse is real, but it wasn't as sudden or as complete as earlier researchers believed. Recent excavations have found elaborate rock gardens called manavai, circular stone structures that protected crops from wind and helped retain soil moisture. These weren't primitive farming techniques. They were sophisticated adaptations to a harsh environment. The buried portions of the landscape around the Moai have yielded seeds, pollen, and plant remains that tell a more complex story about how the Rapa Nui fed themselves. They cultivated sweet potatoes, taro, bananas, sugarcane, and chickens. When the trees disappeared, they adapted. They didn't just give up and collapse immediately. They fought to survive using every technique they could invent, and they almost made it. The population had stabilized at a lower but sustainable level by the time Europeans arrived in 1722. Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen was the first European to land on the island on Easter Sunday, which is how the place got its European name. He estimated between 2,000 and 3,000 people lived there, and, by all accounts, they seemed healthy and well organized, despite living on a deforested island. But European contact brought something worse than deforestation: disease, slavery, cultural destruction. In 1862, Peruvian slavers raided the island and kidnapped about 1,500 people, roughly half the population. Those who weren't worked to death in South American mines eventually got repatriated, but they brought smallpox back with them. The epidemic that followed was devastating. By 1877, only 111 Rapa Nui people remained alive on the island. The excavations of the last decade have also recovered artifacts from this contact period: glass beads, metal fragments, and other European goods buried in layers above the Moai's feet. These items mark the timeline of cultural collision, the moment when an isolated civilization suddenly became part of a global system that had no interest in preserving their way of life. But here's the thing about those Moai and their buried bodies: they survived. The Rapa Nui people survived. Today, the island is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and efforts to preserve and understand the Moai are ongoing. The Easter Island Statue Project continues to excavate, document, and analyze new findings. Each dig reveals more information, more context, more of the story. And the discoveries keep coming. Just last year, archaeologists found evidence of ceremonial offerings buried at the base of several Moai. Obsidian tools, carved stone figures, and what appeared to be food offerings. These weren't just statues you walked past on your way to get water. They were active religious sites where people made offerings, held ceremonies, and connected with their ancestors. The implications are huge. Everything we thought we knew about Easter Island was based on incomplete information. We were literally only seeing the tip of the iceberg, or, in this case, the tip of the Moai. The buried portions contain centuries of hidden history, art, and information about how one of the world's most isolated civilizations lived, worked, worshipped, and ultimately survived against impossible odds. So, what archaeologists found beneath Easter Island isn't just more stone. It's a correction to the historical record. It's proof that jumping to conclusions based on incomplete evidence is a really bad idea. And it's a reminder that even the most studied, most photographed, most memed locations on Earth can still surprise us with what they've been hiding all along. Those stone heads you thought you knew, they've been keeping secrets. Big ones. And who knows what else is still down there, waiting for someone with a shovel and a whole lot of patience to bring it back into the light.